Welcome everybody. So in today we are going to be reading Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. Um, what I'll be doing is I'll be reading the small little verses or chapters that he has, and I will be giving my interpretation of those little verses and why I think that this will be a good book for anybody to read on their own is because this book kind of goes along with modern day life very, very well. Nietzsche was a philosopher from the 19th century, but his insights to human thinking and specifically the potential that humans could possess um, if they were to disregard certain things. Like if they were able to overcome their dependency on things like religion, or if they were able to let go of petty feelings, then they could achieve something that he would call the Übermensch, or the superhuman. And what this book is kind of falls in line with that because he believed that the superhuman would be beyond good and evil. Good and evil are these very limiting concepts, he believed, and somebody who was going to try and obtain the evolution of mankind was going to be beyond any of that. So, if you want to read along, I'm reading this version right over here. It is the one translated and published by Arcturus Publishing Limited from 2019. I'm going to be skipping the preface because that's really just him calling out other philosophers. Nietzsche does that a lot. He likes to badmouth and call out philosophers and religious figures and politicians on just about everything. So I'll be reading chapter one, prejudices of philosophers. Um, if you feel like I'm stuttering a lot, it's because I do have dyslexia. So this is this is a little bit fun for me too. All right. So chapter one, verse one, the will to truth, which is to tempt us to many a hazardous enterprise, the famous truthfulness of which all philosophers have heretofore spoken with respect. What questions has this will to truth not laid before us? What strange, perplexing, questionable questions? It is already a long story, yet it seems as if it were hardly commenced. It is any wonder if we at last grow distrustful, lose patience, and turn impatiently away? That this Sphinx teaches us at last to ask questions ourselves. Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What really is this will to truth in us? In fact, we made a long halt at the question as to the origin of this will, until at last we come to an absolute standstill before a yet more fundamental question. We inquired about the value of this will. Granted that we want the truth, why not rather untruth? And uncertainty, even ignorance. The problem of the value of truth presented itself before us, uh, or was it we who presented ourselves before the problem? Which of us is the Oedipus here? Which the Sphinx? It would seem to be a rendezvous of questions and notes of interrogation. And could this be believed that it at last seems to us as if the problem had never been propounded before, as if we were the first to discern it, get a sight of it, and risk raising it? For there is risk in raising it. Perhaps there is no greater risk. All right. So in this one, it Nietzsche is basically bringing up the question about why do we follow this will to truth. So back in his day, this was the great dogma of of the era of the philosophers is that everybody seeks truth, and that's what the ultimate purpose, the greatest goal of everything, of all knowledge seekers is to seek truth. Um, but he likes to call this, like, he calls the truth, the will to truth, a sphinx. The particular sphinx he goes over here is the most famous one. So Oedipus was um, this adventurer, basically, in Greek mythology, and one of the times he was in exploring, he comes across a sphinx. Now, this sphinx asks everybody a riddle, and they get three chances to answer it. If they get it wrong, the sphinx eat them. But if they get it right, they can pass past the sphinx. So call the will the truth this dangerous sphinx. Um, Tells you that the pursuit of truth is, or at least in Nietzsche's eyes, a very dangerous pursuit, because that is not actually people's nature, is to pursue the truth, or at least not the objective truth in every scenario. He goes so far as to say, well, why not try to pursue something other than that? Why not pursue falsehoods, or maybe even just stay ignorant in that case? Because you can actually twist the truth in that regard. And you see it a lot today where everybody says they're obsessed with trying to find the truth. And then you can have two very opposing sides saying that, well, I've got the truth, now I have the truth. And we don't know what it is or what the consequences of knowing this truth actually is. So that is the dangerous question which he poses here, is like, what is the truth is worth seeking, and shouldn't we then question whether or not what we know is true? And once you start thinking on that regards, you start going into matrix logic here. You start asking, well, do I know the truth? What is the truth? Are we living in a simulation? What's going on here? Um, or is it just more comfortable to say, well, I know this and I don't want to know more? Or, um, and that's why he says that it can become, who's the Sphinx here, or who's the adventurer? Like, sometimes we become the Sphinx because when we believe we know the truth, we can become really dangerous. So, there's nothing more dangerous than um, a confident, ignorant person. Because as soon as somebody believes they know the truth, or the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, they feel emboldened and armed, and they will go to war based on that truth. Almost quite literally, there were wars fought because two people had differences of opinion, or two different versions of the truth. And that's a great way to bring up chapter 1, because verse 1, because it's called the prejudices of philosophers, the seekers of truth. And yeah, the pursuit of truth is one of their prejudices. All right, so verse 2 then goes on. How could anything originate out of its opposite? For example, truth out of error, or the will to truth out of the will to deception, or the generous deed out of selfishness, for the pure sun-bright vision of the wise man out of covetousness. Such genesis is impossible. Whoever dreams of it is a fool, nay, worse than a fool. Things of the highest value must have a different origin, an origin of their own. In this transitory, seductive, illusory, paltry world, in this turmoil of delusion and cupidity, they cannot have their source, but rather in the lap of being, in the intransitory and the concealed God, and the thing in itself. There must be their source and nowhere else. This mode of reasoning discloses the typical prejudice by which metaphysicians of all times can be recognized. This mode of valuation is at the back of all their logical procedure. Through this belief of theirs, they exert themselves for their knowledge, for something that is in the end solely christened the truth. The fundamental belief of a metaphysician is the belief in antithesis of values. It never occurred even to the wariest of them to doubt here on the very threshold, where doubt, however, was most necessary, though they had made a solemn vow, de omnibus debatatem. For it may be doubted, firstly, whether antithesis exists at all, and secondly, whether the popular valuations and antitheses of value upon which metaphysicians have set their seal are not perhaps merely superficial estimates, merely provisional perspectives, besides being probably made from some corner, perhaps from below. Frog perspectives, as it were, to borrow an expression current among painters. In spite of all the value which may belong to the truth, the positive and the unselfish, it might be possible that the higher and more fundamental value for life generally should be assigned to pretense, to the will, to delusion, to selfishness and cupidity. It might even be possible that what constitutes the value of those good and respected things consists precisely in their being insidiously related, knotted, and cruciated to these evil, apparently opposite things, perhaps even in being essentially identical with them. Perhaps, but who wishes to concern himself with such dangerous perhapses? For that investigation one must await the advent of a new order of philosophers, which as will have other tastes and inclinations, the reverse of those hitherto prevalent. Philosophers of the dangerous perhapses, in every sense of the term. And to speak in all seriousness, I see such new philosophers beginning to appear. Alright, this is the classic case. Well, they had us in the first half, but then they switched sides. So, verse 2 starts off with a very different tone from Nietzsche, where it's stating that these virtues do not have a worldly origin. He says that, so for example, you can't be pure sunbright vision of the wise man without uh, that doesn't come out of covetousness. A generous man is not a covetous man. You can't have somebody who's covetous and generous at the same time. Or more accurately, you can't bring out one element through the actions of another. So he goes on to say that then these good things, these virtues, have their own origin, and they tend to come from God, or um, or whatever divine entity you might believe in. And he then goes on to say, these are the words of any priest or any person trying to sell themselves as virtuous. Anybody trying to influence you and tell you that they are a good person or that their doctrine is what you should be believing in. Because he's saying that these people are willingly trying to deceive you, that they are just, they're trying to say that uh, they're trying to draw lines and say this is good, this is evil. You can't receive good. Good doesn't come from evil. Evil is a worldly thing. Good only comes from heaven. Nietzsche is then trying to say then that that is not the case. You need to be a bit brave and see the origin of these virtues. And once you start looking into the origin of any virtue, you see that um, it has quite a bit of a relation to its opposite, as if the thing and its opposite are two sides of the same coin. So in this case, he likes to talk about truth and untruth. So the uh, the religious ones, they will most probably say, the spiritual leaders, they'll say that you cannot receive truth out of deception. Deception cannot lead to truth. But Nietzsche is saying, hang on, you most probably can receive truth from deception, and you can also be deceived by the truth. But in order to think that way, you have to go against the norms, which back in his day, there were not a lot of philosophers willing to debate whether virtue and worldly traits share an origin. And in order to think that they could share an origin, that requires a brave form of thinking, something that was starting to become more prevalent. And it is definitely much more prevalent today. However, as soon as people seem to establish a sect or a group, then they start putting up these dogmatic walls again. It starts becoming wrong to question and wrong to think that the origin of their virtues could be stemming from what they see as evil. You see this a lot in politics, especially. So, when you are like in America, for example, and there are these two parties, so with us, it's the Democrats and the Republicans. The hardcore Republicans and the hardcore Democrats, they see the other side as